Good morning, everyone. Today is December 8th, 2005, and we are here today at the office of the Macomb Catholic Services on 15945 Canal Road in Clinton Township, Michigan. We are going to be interviewing Mr. Joseph T. Ted Vicks and his experiences and his World War II adventures. My name is Butch Kolf, and I will be the interviewer. The videographer today will be Mr. Paul Wilhelm. Mr. Vicks, Ted, may I call you Ted?
Yes.
Would you state for the recording what war and branch of service you served in?
World War II and Army combat engineers.
And where did you serve, sir?
In Europe.
In Europe. Very good. Ted, let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up, where you went to school, and how you ended up in your branch of service.
Right. Born in Detroit, Michigan, and moved out to Fraser, Michigan in 1938. And about the time of the 1943, I went into the Army from the 12th grade.
Okay. How did you end up enlisting or drafted? Didn't you give me a little bit of your area of growing up?
Well, I joined the service with the intention of getting a preference to what branch I wanted to go into, which was Air Corps at the time, but ended up in the combat engineers.
Now, when you were drafted, you were living at home?
Yes.
I see.
Doing 8th grade. I left the high school in March of 1943.
And what high school was that?
Fraser High School.
Fraser High School. So you enlisted for preferences to what branch you were in. Tell me a little bit about where you went from Fraser to...
I went to Camp Custer, Battle Creek, Michigan. Spent about a week there. And we took a train to Fort Lewis, Washington. And found that we were in the combat engineers. And we spent about 9 months there, and spent 3 months in Oregon on maneuvers. And
what happened to the situation where you wanted to get into the Army Air Corps? What happened there?
Well, nothing. It just ended up in the combat engineers, where we were told we were hand-picked men, which we were really not, I don't believe. But we ended up, after the maneuvers, we came home for our furlough and went back to Fort Lewis. And from there we went across the United States into Boston, Massachusetts, and left for Europe.
About what time frame was that?
That was about in January of 43.
43.
And 44, I'm sorry.
Remember your experience getting on a ship?
Well, we went on a ship that was called the Explorer, which was Admiral Byrd's first ship to the Arctic.
Oh.
And it was a pretty dirty ship by this time. It took us 11 days across the Atlantic in pretty bad weather, and we had a 50 ship convoy, and we were followed by submarines, German submarines, so they took a zigzag course, and then they threw these barrels over the side to see if they could hit a submarine, which was kind of
the depth
a
charges?
little, yeah, depth charges, and it was a little unnerving. And anyway, we got into Scotland, Glasgow, Scotland. Took a train into England, in Salisbury Plains. And that was where we...
Well, before we get, and I want to find out some of your personal experiences in just this short period of time. How did you feel about boot camp? Because you're a young man from Fraser, Michigan,
Yeah.
and how did you feel about boot camp?
Well, it was a little more disciplined, and we were being trained by our regular Army cadre of soldiers who built the Elkhorn Highway in Alaska, and they were pretty tough people. So we were just a bunch of teenagers, and we had to stay in line, let's say, basically. So that was, I think, the most important experience was on the 3-month maneuver in Oregon, which was similar to combat conditions.
Were you learning to be a combat engineer?
Well,
training?
we went to Oregon, and we just were in the desert for about a month, alkali desert near Bend, Oregon, and spent a lot of time in those areas, and ended up in November in the Three Sisters Mountains, which we were not equipped for cold weather.
Uh-huh.
And of course the desert was 115 during the day and freezing at night. So we had a kind of a grueling time at that maneuvers.
Quite an experience for an 18-year-old.
Yeah. And very, very hot out there. Nothing to drink. The water wasn't very good. They used to find a water hole somewhere, and they had a water purification truck that just dipped a hose into the water, and then they had these Lister bags where they put the salt tablets in, and it wasn't very good drinking.
And very good tasting.
Yeah, so anyway, that was basically some of our experience, and we were glad to get back to Fort Lewis, and then we went on to, as I said, to England.
Well, you got on the ship
Yes.
with all of the combat engineering.
Well, they were a variety of them. There were about 2,000 men on that.
Personally, how did the ride affect you?
Well, it didn't bother me, but it did give, many people had the seasickness. Didn't bother me at all. I ate it just as well as I could,
Right.
as far as eating, you know. But we were stacked 5 bunks high. I had the 5th bunk up there near the ceiling, and glad to get off that ship.
The reality of war, when you see them dumping these barrels over track, is your first conscious
Yeah,
experience of saying,
right,
this
yeah.
is for real.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of a new experience. And then first they would shoot off the cannons and their guns, all the guns they would have for trial. So
You ended up in Glasgow now.
Glasgow, Scotland, took a train and ended up in Salisbury Plains. I don't know if you ever heard of the Stonehenge.
Oh, yes.
We were in that area.
Uh-huh.
So they called it Grim's Ditch, and it was a First World War British camp.
Okay.
And at that time, we ran into a lot of water and mud. And we trained there. Basically, I volunteered at that time for a flamethrower and bazooka man, or a rocket launcher, and I went to school for that purpose in England. And so we were there from January till June.
And what possessed you to seek out that training?
I really don't know. I really don't know. But it was something different, I suppose.
Okay.
And I wanted to be kind of way away from the normal, see.
Understand.
But anyway, I did have some extensive training with the flamethrower. In fact, I almost burned myself. I was running with this flamethrower across the field, and they weigh 68 pounds. And not thinking, I had saturated the area in front of me and had not lit it. But then as I was running, I pulled the trigger, which ignites the fuel that I had thrown out, and I was all of a sudden engulfed in a big flame, and I just dropped that nozzle and almost went backwards. But that fire burned for about 3 days. That in England they have a lot of coal in the ground, and so that was one of the experiences I had there. Then we We did experience some of the buzz bombs, V2 rockets, V1, that went over our heads at night, and usually it would be sounding like a freight train, and you'd see some flame coming out the rear end, and then all of a sudden it would quiet, and then the engine stopped, and then that's when they dropped. And that was pretty scary for most of the people in London, for example.
Right.
So we had some experiences right there, and then I think, well, one of the early experiences was we were going to chow one evening about 5 o'clock, and we were out in a wooded area, and one of the bombers, a Sterling bomber, 4-engine bomber, English bomber, was overhead and treetop level just about. And we knew it was going to crash, and it did. And that, when we got to it, it virtually ended all the way up. It went into the ground almost all the way to the tail, and was on fire. And the only thing you would see of any human beings would be what was scattered around, and that was one of the sort of a wake-up call. And
For you personally.
yeah, well, for all of us, and
Uh-huh.
anybody that seen it.
Right.
And so then we were alerted. We were had to be in camp for a period of time where we were waiting for the invasion of Normandy. And we weren't allowed to leave. They had armed guards, and that we were not to leave until the invasion. And some of us did leave, got caught, and they said, well, no more passes until whatever. So it ended up the next day it was invasion of Normandy. So we went across on this ship, and
This is the
this was going across the channel, the English Channel.
English Channel.
And we got into the area of the beachhead, Omaha Beach, and we couldn't get off the ships because the beachhead was quite loaded with tanks, and so dropped into the water. The Germans had built trenches and barbed wire and bombs and booby traps under the water. And
Well, what was your position in the combat engineers now? What was your responsibility?
Well, we were part infantry,
Okay.
and we built bridges, we laid mines, picked up mines, booby traps, that sort of thing.
Okay.
That was actually what our position was. But we were not in a division, we were in a corps, and we were subject to call from any division in the corps.
Okay.
Like as if they needed some infantry.
Specialized help and.
Well, that and infantry. Sometimes we were put into a gap in the infantry line.
I got it.
So anyway, that's what that was all about. And then when we got over to Beachhead, we had to stay in the ship there.
Were you under fire when you got to the beach?
Well, we were not under fire, but they had a smoke screen. They say there wasn't any German planes, but there was some planes out there, and they had all these barrage balloons and so forth. So anyway, we got in. We had to come down these rope ladders, which was kind of scary, and I had been carrying an M1 rifle along with the bazooka, coming down those ropes, and then you're coming into a landing craft. I call them LSTs.
Right.
And they're quite close, and they're bobbing like this, you know, and you're coming down, and you're wondering what would happen if you fell in between.
So you have a bazooka and a rifle strapped to you?
Yes, the back end here, and I, was trying to not get entangled there. So anyway, got down into that landing craft, and as we got to the beachhead, there were quite a couple of good holes in the sides of these landing crafts, and they were driven by Navy ensign,
Right.
and they would just go back from one ship to another and keep unloading, So by the time we got there, the beachhead was secure,
Okay.
see? And that was taken by 29th Infantry and the 4th Infantry, 1st Infantry, I think 2nd Infantry, and when we got into the beachhead, one of the first things that I seen was the 82nd Airborne hanging from their shrouds up in parachutes in the treetops, which were quite up,
Right.
50, 60 feet up. And of course, they were all dead,
Right.
and that was quite a sight
Right.
to see these people. And then one of the first fellows I had seen in that area was a wounded 101st Airborne paratrooper, but they had drifted over in the 82nd Airborne sector.
Mhm.
So then, well, we went forward, and it was so hot. That was the hottest summer they had in Europe for years, and we were clothed in OD wool uniforms, and this was in June, impregnated against gas, which was kind of lardy, and that was really uncomfortable,
And they're heavy too.
and it felt a little bit different, you know, than what you would normally have OD clothes feel like. And well, let's see, what else was I going to say here was that we went forward, and they had some trucks there from the chemical warfare,
Mhm.
expecting maybe the Germans to throw gas, but they didn't. But as we started approaching one of the towns, you could smell death in the air. And as we got there, we found about 50 German soldiers in the ditches, dead, and happened to be one Japanese officer among them, and they were pretty much bloated up by this time, you know, the heat.
Very interesting.
And also, we thought that possibly we were told they had some sort of maneuvers on the beach before we got there, because we seen a lot of wooden shells, simulated bullets, you know, for a Mauser rifle. So anyway, we proceeded on, and from there, and I'm trying to think what else that happened there. Well, by this time we got we got attached to the 30th Infantry. They had just come over after we did. They were all green soldiers from down south. And at this one particular day that they came in, I was down in a beer canal. And I had my bazooka there, and we had a infantry support bridge going across this small area of the canal into a wooded area. And I was the only one out, sort of an outpost type thing. And these fellows started running across the bridge toward the Germans. And this one fellow who was definitely from down south, in his drawl, he said he had fixed bayonet, and he said, "I hate to stick anybody with this rusty thing and give them gangrene." So about 10 minutes later, you heard a lot of gunfire, and it turned out that there were about 8 German soldiers, snipers, up in the trees. And here he comes back. They came back in a retreat across the bridge, and he just kept running when I went. But anyway, they did get the snipers, and they went forward. And I'm trying to think else what came on to that time. Then we, yeah, that was when I met my friend from the service. I was dug in somewhere around Mortain, France, and I was on detached service, came back to my foxhole later. A friend of mine said that there was a high school friend of mine had been there looking for me, and he was dug in down the road a couple of miles. Well, at the day before, while we were with the 30th Infantry, they had caught a battalion of German shock troops on bicycles. And he caught them in a crossfire and wiped them out. And there were bicycles laying all over the place. So I picked up one of the bicycles and proceeded on down the road to see if I could find my friend, which I did. And I did get a flat tire on the way. And we had a little meeting for a short time, and they drove me back in the truck.
What was your friend's name?
Chuck Collins.
Chuck Collins.
He was in high school with me, and he's deceased at this time. So then, trying to think, let's see what else happened over there. Well, we ended up going out to St. Lo, which was a big battle there, and the 30th Infantry was also...
Have you fired your bazooka by this time yet, or no?
Just once, maybe, I think, at that time. But mostly I was like on this, I don't know, outpost type thing, you know. And I'm trying to think, let's see, oh yeah. Well, then later on, as we were fighting in the hedgerows, and the hedgerows were approximately 6-7 feet high and pretty well vegetated. And there was fighting from one hedgerow to another, so it was pretty tough fighting for the U.S. Army. So a sergeant in an ordnance company devised a like a bulldozer blade and was able to weld it on the front of a Sheridan tank. And so they could just plow right through the hedgerow. So this one particular day, I happened to be behind one of those tanks, walking behind him, following him, and he went through this hedgerow, and as he got through the hedgerow, he pivoted to the right, and I'm behind him, kind of holding onto the tank, and I looked down, and he had run over a German soldier. I pivoted right on him, and there was nothing left of him but like a pizza.
Right.
So that was kind of startling. And then I had we had another experience in somewhere in that area that I was on outpost again with 4 other fellows.
Outpost, does that mean you're up ahead of your...
Yeah, well, it's an outpost that you're ahead, yes, and you're kind of...
Scoping out the area?
Yes.
Okay.
Sort of a guard duty.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
what, did the other guys, were just infantry also?
Well, they were in my outfit. No, they were, the 5 of us were from the same platoon.
I know, but you were specialized because you had the bazooka, just in case it was
Well, I
needed,
think that would be it, yes.
Yes.
But we were, well, our unit put us in that position,
Okay,
our battalion.
yeah.
So I was out on this outpost, so we were lying on the ground, open ground, which was farm country, but we were not allowed to go in any vacant houses because that would draw attention to the artillery.
Okay.
So about 5 o'clock in the morning, we were all asleep, and I heard a large drone, loud drone. And I sat up, and I'm looking directly at a German fighter coming down on a dive.
Uh-huh.
And I jumped right up, and being a light sleeper, I woke the other fellows up, and he came right down at us. And we all ran. 3 fellows ran for a slit trench that was built by the Germans when they were there before us. And then there was a cobblestone wall, which was near a farmhouse, and there was an opening in that wall. Someone had pulled out some stone. And a friend of mine from Mount Clemens, he ran out in front of me, and because I was faster than he was, I was in track in high school, but I let him get in, and he got in as far as he could get in, but I wasn't able to get in, and he dropped that 500-pound bomb.
Uh-huh.
And all I could see is black smoke and shrapnel hitting the cobblestone wall. And I had a piece of shrapnel pierce my palm here.
Right.
And it was like a large sliver, went in and out, stayed on both ends.
Uh-huh.
And I thought the other fellows were dead.
Yeah.
But anyway, by the time it's all cleared up, the other fellows were covered up with a lot of dirt, but they had this covered with branches to protect them. I don't know, Germans had some kind of
Right.
a firewood type thing. And so they were pretty much lucky because they were on the perimeter of the concussion.
Yeah.
They could have got killed by concussion, but I think the soft ground also absorbed the bomb.
Right.
The hole was about as big as a house, you know, just about. Small house. And I carried that piece of shrapnel around for several days. I wouldn't go to the medics because I was afraid of them. So I finally found a truck driver who had a pair of side cutters and cut both ends off. And that's how I went for less than a week or something like that. It worked out itself.
Ah.
Very painful though. So that was,
So you didn't get a Purple Heart for that?
I didn't go to the medics.
Oh.
I was deathly afraid of the medics. And we used to call them, you know, there goes a meat wagon, you know.
Okay.
And then in that area, I'll have another little incident was someone had erected some signs like they used to have years ago. What was those tobacco signs they used to have years ago with sayings on them?
Oh, yeah.
I can't just think of it then.
Like the mail pouch or
Did
Roga
you-
shaves? Or...
Yeah. Did you ever stop to think when you're dead how you stink? So somebody had the smarts to do something like that. But anyway, that was one episode there. And well, there was, I kind of went ahead of myself. Just as we got bivouacked the first night in Normandy, we dug in along the hedgerows, which we thought was fairly safe and wooded area. And 1 o'clock in the morning, the Germans attacked with tanks. And one of the shells hit the tree above me and landed right across on top of me virtually, but the heavy part was on top of the hedgerow.
Uh-huh.
And shrapnel was all over my blanket. I had just one single blanket. And I didn't get hit. And then, of course, down just the evening before, a Jeep came in with 3 armored soldiers from 2nd Armored, I believe, and they had stopped in our camp, and they just made their bedding along the Jeep, and a shell hit that, direct hit on that Jeep, killing all 3 of them, and there was a big fire there, and several people got hit down the line. But I know I woke up the next morning and I was kind of had the shakes. And that was kind of one of the first close calls, you know.
Right.
And
You're only 18, 19 years
yeah,
old.
by that time, you know. And let's see. Well, then we were another little incident might be interesting. Was several of us were reconnoitering in a wooded area in Normandy, and there was a vacant house, small vacant house, and some of the fellows, 4 or 5 of them, were approaching the front door, and I had the sixth sense of some type that I looked in the side window, and as I looked in the window, there was a table in front of the front door with a German Mauser rifle fastened to the table with hand grenades and whatever, and anyone opening the door would explode. But later we did find out that the entire house was booby-trapped. So we got lucky there that day. And it was there were times when I had some kind of a sixth sense. I don't know what it would be. Then let's see. Well, we were in. Then we were in Belgium. Then we got into Belgium. first day my friend from Alpena got shot there, and that was quite an interesting time as we were serving as infantry. And we got into this town, and usually they would, first thing they would do when we occupied a town would be get the collaborator, chairman collaborators, and they would usually be the mayor and politicians and other things like that. And they put the mayor in a black automobile, because I was standing across the street next to one of our trucks, and one of the sergeants came up to me and asked me if I had an extra rifle, something to give this young fellow who fought for the underground, young Belgian kid, about 16. So I acquired a carbine, loaded it up, gave it to the boy, and he walked across the street and shot the mayor through the head with it. And I'm still standing there, and here was another car came by, which in that area was not so much devastated by war, because
Right.
they were still able to use automobiles. And this car came toward me like in a funeral procession, and it stopped in front of me, and there was an elderly lady in the corner of the car, and there was some gladiolus type flowers in the other corner, and she motioned to me to come in. She was sitting in the back seat. I couldn't speak Belgium, but she said something to me, and she pulled the flowers back, and there was a young boy about 14, 15 with a bullet hole through his head. So that was kind of, all these things were going on one after another, and they also took 50 men and 5 women, which were Belgian citizens, took them out in the field as collaborators and shot them all dead. So,
Was this the underground that shot him?
yeah,
Okay.
they were the underground. And then as I was standing there, one of the, a woman and her daughter spoke to the fellow who was the head of the underground there at the time, and it turns out that they found out that they shot the wrong man.
Ooh.
And so he handed to the lady a pocket watch and a gold wedding band that they took from him.
Oh.
So that was one of the other experiences there. Well, anyway, we waited. We stayed there for approximately 9 days, and because the Second Armored Infantry was supposed to have been in that area, and they ran out of gasoline, so they had to walk 50 miles to relieve us. We were there about 9 days, so that was quite a spot there. And then I think we ended up going through Belgium into Holland, and we were the first United States soldiers to cross into Maastricht, Holland. And so we were there once or twice in that area to take showers. They allowed us to come in the coal mining areas and take showers off, the front lines. And then I think I'm a little ahead of the story. We did meet Dinah Shore one time. She came out in Emerald, France, and was right near the front lines, and sang a few songs.
USO?
No, well, I don't know what, it was just by herself.
Okay.
She came by herself.
Wow.
I mean, she was brought over,
Yeah.
and right near the front lines, and as I recall, she sang a few songs, went into the back end of one of the 6x6 trucks and changed her dress, and I recall when she came back out, her slip was showing about 2 inches, but I always gave her a lot of credit for being there. And as I said, we went into to Holland, and then I think I'm getting ahead of the story again. There was did I tell that? No, I didn't tell that story about the finding the body of that soldier, an officer did. I'm kind of ahead of the story here.
Don't worry about it.
All right. Well, in Normandy, as we were there, early part of Normandy, we were called one morning to find the body of an officer who was blown out of his Jeep. But there were some people from our platoon the day before, and they were not successful. So I happened to come over the next morning with my squad, and I had a mine detector, and I was approached by a medical captain from a reconnaissance unit, and he said, you know, I said, my friend was in that Jeep yesterday when it was blown up by these, in this roadblock. And he said, we can't find the body. Well, anyway, the officer was sitting in the back of the Jeep, open Jeep, with two enlisted men in the front. And the front wheels went over the teller mines, which are huge anti-vehicle mine, tank mines. And the rear wheels must have hit the mines and set it off. And turns out he was catapulted out of that back end of that Jeep. But the two soldiers were lying nearby, and that Jeep was disintegrated. So anyway, I had my mine detector, and then we have what they call a tracing tape, similar to a measuring.
Yes.
Thing. And it has a little white, about an inch wide white tape. And as you go along with your mine detector and you're clearing the way, whoever's in back of you follows that tape.
I get you.
So the captain had two of his aid men with him, and we went out of the area. It was quite booby-trapped there, and they even booby-trapped the apple trees. So
You had specialized training for
oh yes,
this.
oh yeah, that's part of our job.
And what rank were you at this time?
Well, I was just private first class.
Okay.
But anyway, I proceeded on, and they followed, and finally I got to a railroad embankment. This is very, very rural areas. And I climbed up the embankment, and I saw something in the background there, looked like a body. So I called the captain to come up and with his men, and they came up, and we looked out. We went to that area, and we found his body. And his legs were blown off at the hips, lying on his back, and about 25 years old, quite a husky-looking man. And he knelt down, the captain knelt down, and asked me as he was kneeling down if I wanted his .45 automatic, which was held by a web belt, but there was only one string, or tongue, whatever you want to call it, holding that belt to his body. So he gave me his .45, and as we were talking from two different directions, his aid men were carrying his legs back to us there.
He was blown how far away?
I would guess it had to have been a quarter of a mile.
Wow.
It had to have been.
Wow.
As I looked back, you know, it was because no one could find him the day before.
Right.
And he must have just been, and he was quite a large man, you know.
Right, right.
I would say most of us were young kids. We were like 135 pounds, but he looked to me like he weighed 200, you know.
Yeah.
And his legs, you know, thighs were quite
Right,
large.
Right.
And I don't know who he was, anything like that, but that was one of the episodes that was kind of, you know,
Unnerving for you.
unnerving, you know. And
What did you do with this .45? Did you?
well, I carried a .45 all the way through the Army and all through the war, and that's another story how I disposed of it. It was after the end of the war.
Okay.
And Then, well, I am ahead of the story. I've got these,
Notes.
I've written down things, but not in the way they should be. One of the things was that, important things was that, while we were leaving the hedgerows in Normandy, the land forces were going to jump off at 7:30 in the morning. And we were dug in, and we didn't know what was going to happen, but 7:30 in the morning, 3,200 planes of our planes went over our heads in 2 hours, and they went over our heads. The Germans were a mile ahead, and they banked. As they banked over the German lines, it was just like a shade coming down. The bombs came down like a pulling a shade down. And then, of course, a lot of German ack-ack. And I got out of my foxhole, and I was really looking, seen over, and some of the fellows were so scared they wouldn't come out of their foxholes. And when those bombs came down, it was like the oxygen was pulled out of your lungs. The ground shook, and you would think the war was going to be over at this point. And you look up in the air, and you've seen B-24s, B-17s, P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, P-38 Lightnings, A-20s, and all these, excuse me, all these planes. And as you look up in the air and you see a bomber thousands of feet up, a wing flying off, see a couple of dots coming down, parachutes,
Right.
where somebody was hit. It was quite a scene. And what happened was there was a pattern bombing, and they did hit some of our forces, and that was on one side of us there, on one flank, and he killed General McNair, who was chief of the Army Ground Forces, and I believe several hundred GIs got killed from our own planes.
Friendly fire.
But as we went forward, it was a pattern bombing. There was holes all over the place. But the Germans that were in that area, some of them were almost crazed. But they certainly didn't give up, the others. And so that was one of the things I did miss. But to see 3,000 planes in the air in 2 hours is a sight to see.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, and you just can't believe it to see something like that. And so anyway, we did get into Paris, and when I got into Paris, or we got into Paris, there was street fighting, and the Germans were still up in some of the buildings. And of course the civilians of Paris were gathering out in the streets, and I was able to buy a miniature Eiffel Tower right there from someone selling them. And then a group of people started crowding around myself and a friend of mine from East Detroit. And we were wondering, they looked hostile, So there happened to be a very tall Frenchman, about 30, 35. And he spoke English, and he said, well, the people think you look like one of the German officers that was stationed down in the area. And they were going to, go after me. So anyway, he said, well, would you do me a favor? My wife just had a baby yesterday, and I just live around the block. Would you come over and she would like to see the first American soldiers. So my friend and I walked over there, and she was lying in bed with her baby, and then I had photographs of those people. And so that was quite the thing. And so we went on, and from there, and as I said, we went into Belgium and Holland, and then into Germany, and I'm trying to see here. Then we were in the big battle of Aachen, Germany. 30th Infantry was in that fight.
You left Paris and
Yes,
are
as
still
I
going
said,
forward.
I'm kind of
Okay.
a little bit going behind here, so we ended up in going through Belgium and Holland and entering Aachen, Germany, which was a big battle there. I believe we took the city, and then the Germans took it back, and I believe at that time Hitler promised the German people he was going to give Aachen back to the Germany by Christmas, which didn't happen. And so we went. We also did blow up the Siegfried Line. I don't know if you're familiar with that. The Siegfried Line was went through Germany. I think it went through parts of Belgium and Holland, and actually were built largely by many of the local people from Holland and Belgium during the 1930s.
Leave that thought for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of, I should have managed my notes better.
Hey, not a problem. It's your story, your
Yeah.
history, your
Yeah.
remembrances. Any way you
Well,
want
as
to
I
tell
said,
it.
I should have gotten a little bit better together. And, am I on yet?
Oh, yes, you
Oh,
are.
okay, we're on. And so after we left there, we were going pretty fast through Germany, and then the one evening at chow time, while we were in line waiting for our chow, we were told that we were going to move forward, that our forces were pushed 50 miles back by Rundstedt, German Rundstedt. So we finished our dinner and boarded the trucks and, lock and load and everything. So we proceeded on and ended up in the Battle of the Bulge. And we were actually sent to another flank, which was in the Hürtgen Forest. There was already a big battle there proceeding when we got there. Very thick forest, and they had a big fight in there. And so we were sent there as a rear guard action, and expecting Rundstedt to come into that area, have another force coming in that area. So we booby-trapped all the trees, the culverts, roads, whatever, and we had large bales of barbed wire, and we had to go and string barbed wire. And of course then that was difficult because the Germans had command of a high hill or small mountain, whatever it was, and we couldn't do anything during the day. We had to work at night, and we couldn't dig. The ground was frozen, so we had to blast some of the holes in there, put the pickets in, and then the Germans would hear us, and then they would throw flares, and you'd dive for the snow. And then we learned to find some sheets, bed sheets, and try to cover yourself up. And that was quite cold in the forest because the snow didn't melt there. And we were there Christmas, I remember Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, in which we didn't have much to eat, and we didn't even have a good hot cup of coffee. And so the cold was really one thing. It was really, really tough. And then when any time you're in a wooded area and the artillery come the German artillery or bombs come in and they hit the trees, you get these tree bursts. And that is where a lot of your people get wounded, same as in the Civil War.
Like the wood shrapnel.
Yeah, well, the shell would hit a tree and it would just splatter.
Yeah.
Civil War was the same thing, you know. And then after the Battle of the Bulge, and then we kind of swept across Germany, and we took the 29th Infantry across the Ruhr River in Jülich, Germany, February 23rd, 1945. It was my brother's birthday, that's why I remember it. And we built these infantry support bridge, and then we had the assault boats. And that morning, early, about 7:30, I fell off one of the pontoons into the freezing water and wasn't very comfortable for the rest of the day. But we managed to get through it there, and that was quite a thing to go across in salt boats too. And let's see, where else we got here? So anyway, we ended up going through some of the big cities, Mönchengladbach and Kassel, and then the war was over and we ended up in Goslar, Germany. And again, at that time I was on detached service, and when I came back, the war had just ended, and we found that I found that we were in Goslar. It was a very nice German town which housed a German hospital, soldiers' hospital, and somewhat like what Grosse Pointe would be here, you know, in mansions. So I found that our platoon was in Alfred Krupp's home. He was a munitions maker from Germany, and he was instrumental in backing the German army in World War I and II with, you know, making munitions and so forth. So I had the entire sunroom, as I remember. That picture right there does show me right in front of Krupp's home.
There you are. Is that a machine gun?
That's a German Schmeiser.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why I had that one at that point, but I had it.
You found it and said, hey.
Well, it was somewheres. I don't know where I got it. I went through a lot of guns through at that time. And the next mansion over belonged to General Kesselring from Italy. He was a German general, commanding general in Italy. And they did leave behind a manager of some sort to make sure that the house wasn't
destroyed or vandalized.
Vandalized to a point, you know. And so then we ended up in Frankfurt, Germany. And we bivouacked out in the woods. And at that time, the group of soldiers, officers from our Royal Air Force came in. And I was carrying this .45 that I mentioned earlier, and by this time I had made a plexiglass grips out of it from a Down Messerschmitt's windshield, and put some tin foil behind it, and I had it in the shoulder holster. And one of the officers spied this gun and wanted to trade, and I eventually did trade, and I don't know why to this day. And this officer here, he was American, flying for the Canadian Air Force, Danford Brown. He was doing the talking, actually, and he said, you know who that officer is? I says, no. He says, Johnny Johnson. I said, well, I still don't know who he is. He said he shot down 38 German fighters, and he's one of the air aces. So it turns out that 50 years later, I was living in Florida, and there was a symposium in Tampa, which I was about 10 or 20 miles away, and I again met him 50 years later.
Wow.
and I met him at the symposium, and there is this letter here that he wrote me while I was living in Mackinac City at the time, 1991. It's thank you for your letter of 19th of April about the big arms deal in 1945. I remember the incident well, and I was accompanied by a certain squadron leader, Danforth Brown, an American serving with the RCAF. Danforth, I recall, did most of the talking and bartering, and today he is a highly successful lawyer in Tampa, Florida, and is still talking and bartering. Good to hear from you after all the years. Best wishes and comradeship, Johnny Johnson, Air Marshal of England.
Wow. Let me see. This is a letter you got from them.
Yeah, there's the envelope and everything there.
Oh, yeah. And this gentleman here is the gentleman he's talking about.
Yeah. And this is also a print.
Uh-huh.
Also a print of him that they had at the symposium, you know. And then they have all the signatures of the air aces that were there. You know?
Ah. And so you got a copy of this, or they...
That's a copy of one of the prints that was available.
I see.
You know.
And here's Johnny Johnson signed it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's quite a souvenir to have. That's quite a piece of memorabilia.
And he had died about 2 years ago.
I see.
And you'll see him in this. This is Johnny Johnson and I right there at the symposium.
I see. Uh-huh. And he remembers that incident where he got your pistol.
Yes, but he didn't have it any longer. He didn't know what happened to it.
Oh.
But
that's quite a bit of history here.
Well, I wish I would have had the gun that I received from him.
Oh.
I gave it away before I left Europe.
Uh-huh.
And this is quite unique to have someone that you haven't seen in 50 years.
Absolutely.
And then I guess while I'm on this subject here, I may as well just go a little bit further.
Sure.
And stating that I met Colonel Gabreski there, and that's Colonel and Gabreski and myself there.
And who was Colonel Gabreski?
Colonel Gabreski was a pilot in Europe, and he was head of the Polish squadron because he could speak Polish.
I see.
His parents came from Poland in early 1900s, and they...
Is that your background, being Polish?
No, no. His parents came from Poland, and during the Depression days, they made Polish sausage and sold it door to door.
Wow.
And he was able to graduate from Notre Dame
Uh-huh.
by the skin of his teeth, I guess. All these people have written books, so I know a little bit about them.
Sure.
And then he went to flight school and almost flunked that out. But he shot down 26 German fighters and 6.5 MiGs in Korea.
Wow.
And he was a very humble man, and as you can see him praising me for
Yes.
being on the ground forces.
Well, he understood.
And he was above.
Yeah.
So he knew what was down below, see. And he later on became the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad after World War II.
Uh-huh.
And he was also the commandant of Selfridge Field that went after the war.
Yeah, interesting.
And
Well, let's talk about some of these.
all right. Well, just
okay.
just one more person here that I would like to also
Recognize.
include would be. Let's see where I've got his picture here somewhere. I should have it. Well, maybe
On the back of this one?
it could be. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, here.
All right, this fellow was at the symposium, and that's Brigadier General James Howard.
Which one is that, the top or the bottom guy?
This fellow right here.
That's,
Brigadier General James Howard, and he was the only pilot in World War II in Europe to win the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Oh.
And he flew before the World War II
Right.
for the Flying Tigers.
Okay. Yep.
And his parents were missionaries in China.
Uh-huh.
He was born in China as they were missionaries there. And the story is, in simple words, that he was flying a P-51 Mustang, and when he his formation somehow got lost, they were going to support some German bombers going into Germany, and so he found himself alone somehow through the clouds. I don't know exactly, I forget the story. He found he was alone, and he was protecting this bomber formation, and he circled that formation like a sheepdog would with sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And he attacked 35 German fighters alone.
Wow.
Shot down 4. And 300 U.S. airmen witnessed that sight. They couldn't believe their eyes. And it took about a week for them to find out who that officer was.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived about 10 miles from him in Florida, and that is his obituary here.
This is obituary of Brigadier General James Howell Howard. And it says right here, born in
Canton, China.
Canton, China. He's buried in the Arlington National Cemetery.
Mhm.
And he got the Congressional Medal of Honor.
And the lapel pin here was given to me by his older sister, which is a Flying Tiger pin.
Wow.
And that was when, he was in the Flying Tigers before the war.
Uh-huh.
And then, I don't know exactly, it was a few years later, could have been a year or two or so, he had passed away, and this is how I obtained this. I went to his funeral.
Yes.
In Florida, Bel Air,
That's a great piece of memorabilia.
Bel Air Bluffs, Florida, and surprisingly, there were not a lot of people there. There were some people from the Flying Tigers, I believe,
Yes.
there. And I didn't get to speak to too many of them, but I did speak at length with his sister, who was about 85 at the time, living, I believe, in Massachusetts. So this is a good remembrance right here. And
The war's over.
the war's over. And
Did you have enough points to leave Germany right away?
no. Oh, well, see, there's another story came up. We were bivouacked in that area in Frankfurt, and they started to split our battalion up
Mhm.
for some reason, and I didn't volunteer to go in any other. They used to have a bulletin board with every day would be a different unit that you could join, as the war was still on in Japan, and I was the last one to go, and I ended up going into the 332nd Engineer Heavy Bridge Regiment. Now, we were in the 1st Army Spearhead, and then later on, I think it was after the Bulge, we entered the 9th Army under General Simpson. So we were still in that spearhead that met the Russians on the Elbe River in Magdeburg, Germany. And we waited 1 full week for the Russians to take Berlin.
Yes.
But we were there a week ahead of them,
Ah.
see. But because of political
Negotiations and
negotiations,
deals.
whatever. And so anyway, as I said, I ended up going back to Magdeburg. Unbelievable. And this unit was building a huge bridge across the Elbe River, which the Germans had blown up and retreating to Germany,
Right.
or Berlin, and Russian army by this time had occupied that part of East Germany. So let's say I was under control, because I had nothing to do with my former unit.
Right.
So I was under control with 200 other GIs under the Russian army.
Ah.
We were only 200 Americans in the middle of the Russian army who occupied East Germany.
Right.
Right up at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin was the, excuse me, the dividing line, you know. And so that was quite an experience being with them. And our government was building this bridge for the Russian army, because they had built a very simple wood bridge across the river, which was not able to, ship anything under.
Right.
It couldn't go underneath. So we were building. They had built this bridge pretty much while I got there. They had built that almost completed, I should say. And so I got, when I got there, being a combat soldier, they kind of gave me a little something, I don't know what you want to call it, but they gave me a kind of a good job. They let me drive a Jeep or something and a weapons, not a weapons carrier, command car. So I stayed at the bridge site basically after that, and brought the officer there, and so he can do his duty.
You were pretty much a chauffeur.
Yeah, and then on weekends I would take he and a couple other officers to Berlin, which was like 65 miles away, and they liked my driving. They thought because I was from Detroit, Michigan, I was a very good driver, which I was. So I would Friday night drive them to Berlin and drop them off with their case of whiskey, whatever, and pick them up on Sunday. So I had the command car, or whatever, I was driving to myself, see. So I had some experiences there. And then after, shortly after, I was ended up going from Magdeburg to Berlin. I was in Berlin for a month or two, and by this time, where I was in Berlin, there was the that area was, they called it the 1st Allied Airborne Army. We had the 82nd Airborne Honor Guard, and then the Russians had the, I don't know, whatever unit it was, that was the unit that was actually, we were under, while they were building the bridge to stop the Germans at Stalingrad. They were tough people. And then, of course, English had their commandos and so forth, see. So that was kind of an experience there. And then I ended up talking about points you waited for points, and I don't remember, I was high on points too, but it wasn't enough at that time to go back home. So I ended up in Nuremberg, Germany, and we boarded a 14-8 boxcars like they had in World War I. And it was, the boxcar was just filled with soldiers. There was no place to move, virtually no place to lay down. And strangely, it was, we had a full colonel in there with us, which, I don't know why he was in there. And this was again in winter months, January, February, whatever. And we rode that train 4 days and 4 nights. And we only had K rations for in the morning, nothing for lunch. And evening, we would stop at a certain area where they would have a hot dinner prepared by German soldiers, whatever. And we were confined in that for 4 days and 4 nights. And then I ended up in Le Havre, France. And from Le Havre, France, I ended up landing in, I think, Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and I was discharged at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. And these pictures here was when I was taken in.
This looks like early on. You sent it to somebody.
Yeah, that was my parents I sent it to, I believe, or my girlfriend, whatever. And that was taken possibly in Germany,
Mhm.
and that was taken, my mother had sent this in the Macomb News,
Yes.
and that was in the Macomb News.
Picture of you, and there you are with the German flag
That was taken after the war,
after the war.
in front of my mother and dad's house.
I see. And that's something, that souvenir that you,
Well, it was
Got-
something I had quite a few items that I
Yeah.
had sent back through the years, because I was always in the front lines and I was able to get virtually a lot of things, you know. I had three, actually at one time I had three full uniforms of a German colonel.
I see.
And one of the uniforms was all white.
So what did you do when you got out of service?
Well, I went to, I didn't do anything for a while. I found that 6 months later I got ill, and I believe later on through the years I had probably traumatic war syndrome.
Right. Depression.
Post-traumatic war syndrome.
Right.
I had no inkling of when I was there. Naturally, we were all frightened to a point, you know.
Yes.
And but they I was going to say another thing. One other thing I was going to I missed. If I would I continue just a minute on this one
Go
area?
right ahead.
All right. What this one area was, we were in Germany, and we had just got in there and I dug in along some bushes of some type, and thinking that's protection, you know. But then, as I dug in, I fell uneasy, and I got out of the foxhole and then was in a grassy area, like a little knoll, and a few other fellows, for some reason, went along with me up there. I don't know if they had dug in or not, but about 11 o'clock rather, we used to call the German Air Force Bed Shake Charlie. And they said there wasn't any German planes, but they came over and they started the bombing. And you're lying like this and you're looking up, and you know, knowing they were throwing, I would believe they were anti-personnel bombs. So it was like throwing something out of a bushel basket, you know, and they were anti-personnel.
Right.
It was smaller type thing. And my gosh, they started throwing these things, and a lot of it landed in those little shrubs. Caught those shrubs on fire.
Yeah.
And that's where I was dug in initially. And a fellow next to me, he got a piece of shrapnel. He had like a bandana with a knot like a cowboy had, and a piece of shrapnel got there and went in his sole of his foot. Shoot. Well, anyway, I'm lying there and I'm thinking, this is it. And I just thought I was going to die. And I let go, and I had this sort of a peaceful feeling, and like out of the body, did you hear about? Out of the body feeling. And I don't know if there was any kind of a light at the tunnel, but I just was serene. And of course then by that time, of course the bombers had passed over, and this was at night. Of course next morning we could find out what went on there. So that was another episode where something different would happen to you, you know.
A memory.
You know what I'm saying? Well, experience of some sort that you never heard of in those days, you know.
Right.
Well, getting back to what we were just saying, yes, I did have I started having some panic attacks and anxiety attacks. First symptoms were, I was only 21 when I came home. My hands were sweaty.
Yeah.
Heart was going like this. By this time I had been married 6 months. And not knowing just exactly what was going on, you know. So I didn't do it much I didn't hardly leave the house for about a year. I didn't go to any veterans hospital or anything. And I ended up, my mother and dad were in a real estate business in East Detroit, and they opened up a sub-office in Fraser. And I couldn't handle the real estate business. It was a little bit too slow, too unnerving, you know. And it's something that a lot of people just cannot get back into routine,
Right,
you know. You don't know why,
right.
but my brother went to college. He was in the Seabees in World War II. He went to college, but I couldn't handle it, see. So then I just had a few jobs, plastic factory, and after I left the real estate. And I ended up pretty much working for myself later on. I got into, I had a federal license and I selling some new guns and
Okay.
mostly antique items. I got into Civil War after a while in 1962. I was in there for 43 years, still am. And basically I was just
Employed?
self-employed and sold, bought and sold cars, like collector cars.
Right.
There was a time when convertibles would stop being made, so you start in limousines even, a few limousines. So I was into cars for quite a bit. So basically that is my story.
Well, that's great. Anything before we end our interview and our discussions, anything you'd like to say as a closing statement about your experiences and...
Well, sometimes you wonder what it's all about, because as I was in Germany for, I was overseas 2 years and in Germany for 13 months. And I got to be around the German people, and I liked them, you know. And sometimes, you know, as I was in Berlin, are you familiar with the Brandenburg Gate there? Well, they would be on one, East Germany is on one side and West Germany is on this side. See? So I would be at the gate there, and a lot of civilian people say, would you please take my envelope and mail it to some of our relatives on west end of Germany. And I did a lot of things like that, you know. And you wonder what it's all about after a while, you know. Do you think that even World War II is worth it?
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, we lost 2,000 men the first day of D-Day, 2,000. And it's, you look back and you wonder. Now, I have a neighbor next door that a young couple built a house 2 years ago, and their father, his father, I should say, was a German soldier captured in Normandy.
Yeah.
But he was supposedly about 15 years old. I really didn't talk to him all that much. I was trying to get with him. And I met him, like I said, 2 years ago. A very nice man. His name is Oscar. And he was captured, brought to the United States, and was interned in Michigan and I think in Illinois or Indiana later. And of course those German prisoners had it better than the soldiers had it.
Right.
We had it. So it turns out that evidently he went back to Germany when he was released, and he came back here. He's been here about 50 years.
Wow.
So I mean, here you're fighting somebody. I mean, it's an irony that you can't explain. Here you're fighting a German fellow, and he, you know, so forth, and he's living in this country, and he comes and ends up moving back to this country, and a nice fellow, you know.
Yeah.
So you wonder what it's all about.
Well, it's another soldier talking to another soldier.
Yeah, and you know, you see, well, the Russians, again, they were our allies, but they really weren't. We didn't like them, and I don't think they liked us. And they were very tough, crude people. See, most of these people were peasants in those days. You know, 56 years ago, everyone didn't have a good education.
Right.
And these people were, the Russian soldiers, I seen them, never even knew what a pencil looked like, a pen, a watch. You can't believe they didn't have a watch or anything. they didn't have any kind of necessities. And they they weren't paid, I understand, for 3 years by the Russian army. And when they were paid, they weren't allowed to bring the money back to Russia. So they had to spend it, and in the area like Berlin, whatever they done with it, see. So I don't know, I wonder sometimes, you know, it hurt a lot of people, you know, one way or the other. And
Well, in closing, I'd like to, say thank you very much for your service. I'm a veteran myself. I'm honored to know you. You're part of the greatest generation. I'm sure that there are very, very many stories that we didn't touch
well,
upon.
of course, yeah.
I see here by your data that you submitted that you were in 5 major battles. You have a Bronze Star with a cluster.
Yeah.
You have a unit citation with a cluster, combat infantry badge.
Yeah.
I'm honored to know you, sir, and I thank you for your service.
It was only what we, at that time, thought we had to do, you know, most of
Shake
us.
your hand. Thank you
Most
very
of us
much.
did what we thought we should do.
God bless
you. And so that's the way life is. So you don't really know what it's all about in the end, you know. And I don't care if you throw this on, but there were so many these heroes, like I pointed out to you here, that I just knew them momentarily, and these people should have been on maybe some postage stamps.
Well, let me tell you,
something.
in my opinion, you're a hero.
And
And don't ever think you're not. Thank you. Okay, that was tough.
yeah, well, it's